Hello and welcome to Financial Deep Dive with CWT. My name is Caleb Tanner and I'm the owner of financebycwt.com, which is a website all about financial news, stock advisement. Visit the website and see it for yourself. In this podcast episode, it's actually a very cool episode because this is the first episode that I'm doing on YouTube as well. So far, this podcast has been a Spotify exclusive. All the episodes are on Spotify, and there's about 3 others so far, and now they're on the 4th episode. I decided to start a YouTube channel and actually do some of the episodes on there as well. And this is actually a really cool episode because we're talking about one of my favorite companies in existence, Acorns. What Acorns does is robo-investing. So basically, people that are out there that want to start investing and want to build an investment portfolio for themselves, but really don't know either how to do it or just want something passive that they can just put money into and have it and get invested into a lot of different ETFs and just passively invest without putting any work into it. Those are the kind of the two types of people that use Acorns. Just people that don't know how to invest. They're just looking for something to do it for them, or people that are just looking for a passive way to invest some of their money. Acorns is going to be a small part of their entire investment portfolio, but it's just a passive way to do it. And those two people that use Acorns now have something new attached to it. Acorns has introduced Bitcoin, where now people that have an Acorns account that are investing into it can, if they want to, add a Bitcoin Futures ETF to their overall stock portfolio. And I think that's a very interesting move. Acorns was actually supposed to go public this year via SPAC, and they ended up not happening. Which, as someone who's really into Acorns as a company, I had, quite a bit of my own personal money invested into the company that was going to become Acorns when they merged with the SPAC. And, that ended up not happening. But Acorns does plan to go public later, but they want to do it via IPO instead of SPAC, which I think is a very interesting move. With Acorns as a company, it takes a lot of money to actually run it, which is why, they market so much actually to get more users. They have a lot of operating expenses. So, they constantly need to raise more money, which, with them going public, I think it'll be a very interesting move. It is very interesting that they decided not to go via SPAC. And I think the reason for that is that a lot of SPACs have performed very poorly, as of late. The very, new companies, they just haven't performed well. And I think Acorns is kind of, instead of going that route, they think it would be better to go, in a more traditional IPO sense. But going back to Bitcoin itself, I think it was a very interesting move, having people actually be able to get exposed to Bitcoin, because Acorns has always been there's two different things that I think was weird about this move. First, Acorns is very much a conservative investment option. They have a bunch of different portfolios, one being conservative, and then, going all the way to aggressive. And aggressive is supposed to be the most high risk portfolio that they have. But it's really not a high risk portfolio at all, really. It's a very most people that invest would consider a portfolio of Acorns most aggressive option to be very conservative. And the reason for that is because they have basically they put your money into VU, which is an S&P 500 index, which, most people consider to be, very safe. Also, they have a lot of international stocks, which would be a little bit more high risk, most people would say, but still very conservative with how they do it. And, smaller cap companies. And basically, the reason they put it as aggressive is because there's no access to bonds. The most conservative portfolio they have is essentially all bonds, and it gets slowly into you start off with all bonds, and you get slowly more into stocks the more further you go on the list. And then aggressive is all stocks, but still a very conservative route. And the reason I find it interesting that they're letting, Bitcoin futures on there is because Bitcoin futures is even more risky than Bitcoin itself, which Bitcoin is very volatile. And a lot of people consider Bitcoin to be, a very a very high risk, option. It's a very high risk asset. And even though I'm very bullish on Bitcoin and believe in it, quite a bit, it is a risky investment. So it's weird that, Acorns, which has always been such conservative with investing, is putting a riskier, option for their investors. Now, just by having the aggressive portfolio on Acorns does not mean that you automatically are investing into Bitcoin futures. It just means that you have the option to if you want. Of course, one thing that they're doing is it puts 5% of your entire portfolio into Bitcoin futures. Like the Bitcoin Future ETF BITO is how it's done, but 5% is going to that. Which, I wish they would have done it where you could pick the percentage. Because I think, 5%, like especially with people with like really big portfolios, that's quite a bit of money. I think what Acorn should have done is like set it from like 1 to 5%, where people that want, slight exposure to Bitcoin could put it in at, 1% and then have, basically not much of their portfolio at all into it, but, enough to at least be into it and not like have like, be able to set it where it can go like 1% to 5% and then 5% kind of be like the max. That's what I think that they should have done. I think that would have made the most sense to do it that way. But as of right now, it's either 5% or nothing. And, I think there's a few problems with Bitcoin futures, like opposed to just Bitcoin. First off, this is not a knock on Acorns at all. Acorns had to go the Bitcoin future route if they were going to put Bitcoin in at all because the SEC will not approve a Bitcoin spot ETF at this time. So, if you invest into Bitcoin, like let's say it's $40,000 a coin and you buy a coin, if you buy a Bitcoin like spot ETF, it's going to move with the price of Bitcoin exactly. It is the price of Bitcoin. And Bitcoin futures is way different. Like you're basically betting you're betting on the future price of Bitcoin. And that's a lot more riskier and it moves a lot differently. Like if Bitcoin, can go up quite a bit more than like the futures does, or like vice versa, like a Bitcoin future ETF is not going to move with the price of Bitcoin, like to the exact extent that a Bitcoin like spot ETF would go. But because there is no Bitcoin spot ETF and the SEC, doesn't really have any plans to approve one, and in fact, there's Bitcoin like spot ETFs that get proposed all the time, and the SEC just never approves them. If they were going to put an ETF in there, they would have had to done a Bitcoin future ETF, which is what they did. But there's problems with it, like I was saying, like there is going to be like an expense ratio, like by holding the ETF, like you're going to pay the people that actually make the ETF, which means that you're losing money than just buying Bitcoin itself. And also, it doesn't move exactly with the price of Bitcoin. It's a lot more volatile than even Bitcoin, and it's a lot riskier than Bitcoin. Like especially with like Acorns trying to do like such a conservative like investing like strategy, it's weird that they would, go with something like such high risk as Bitcoin for one, but a Bitcoin future ETF is even more risky than just Bitcoin itself, which I think is even like weirder that they went with like that option. But there's also some like good parts with it too. There's parts that I'm like happy that they actually went this route to begin with, because I'm very bullish on Bitcoin myself, and having like even if it doesn't move with Bitcoin like to the exact extent, like having a way to get attached to Bitcoin at all is something that I appreciate that they're doing, and it also shows that, or at least my prediction is, when a Bitcoin spot ETF does get approved by the SEC and actually is able to exist, I think this means that it's very likely that they will add that to Acorns as well. And I think that would be huge. Like if you actually have a Bitcoin spot ETF and you have the option to invest like 5% of your portfolio into it, like I definitely would do that on Acorns, and I feel like many people would as well. And especially people that, are just using Acorns and are just trying to find a way to invest their money with, and they don't necessarily know how to buy like stocks themselves, like research it, and want Bitcoin. I think it's a good thing if they're able to have it. But and I also think that it's good that just 5% is going in. Like the fact that it's 5% of the portfolio, because one thing that a lot of of the popular investors like are into Bitcoin are saying is that you don't have to go 100% into Bitcoin to take advantage of it. Like if you do just like 2 to 5% into Bitcoin, and you have like a volatile asset, and let's say it, like Bitcoin just does insanely bad, right? Like let's say the people that are bearish on it are right and Bitcoin fails. Well then yeah, like that's gonna hurt, like losing 5% of your portfolio. but it's only 5%. But if Bitcoin does really, really, really well, like the bulls are saying, then even though you just have 5% of your portfolio into it, you're still able to take, quite a bit of advantage of the fact that it did so well. So it's like 5% is really, it sounds like, a lot, like especially like if you have like, $1 million portfolio, 5% of that is huge. But, in the grand scheme of things, it's really not that much. And with something like Bitcoin that has so much potential, but also so much like risk attached to it, it's good to just have like 5% attached. And when a Bitcoin like spot ETF does come out, and if it does get included to Acorns, I think that that would be absolutely like huge, not only for the platform, but as Bitcoin as a whole, because now it's exposed to like a whole new kind of people. Like Bitcoin is extremely easy to buy now, but it wasn't always like that. Like it used to be insanely difficult to actually go out and get Bitcoin. And even if you do buy Bitcoin now, you either have to like hold it on exchanges, which, personally, I don't personally see like the big deal of holding it on an exchange, especially with like a small amount of Bitcoin. But a lot of people do, where they want it in their own like personal wallets. And, a lot of that, like, depending on how you actually do it, it can be costly to actually like set up a wallet. And if you're like operating on like a low amount of cash, like into Bitcoin, and you like want it to be in like a wallet so like it's safe, it can become like insanely expensive to actually do that. Where, if you're with Acorns and just, trying to have a little bit of money there invested so you can actually build something like slowly like increase it over time. And you have, 5% like into a Bitcoin spot ETF where you don't have to worry about, anything really, then, that just sounds like, the perfect solution. So with Bitcoin being exposed, like, the people that fit that category, that could do a lot for the price of Bitcoin itself, like the fact that, more and more people will be exposed to it. So, through researching into like Bitcoin futures, while I'm not against buying, Bitcoin futures, like when BITO first come out and, it achieved $1 billion like invested into it, like in a day, which was absolutely insane. So, there's a lot of people that are, investing into the futures market. And I think that people just have to realize that while there's nothing wrong with, putting 5% of your portfolio into Bitcoin futures if you understand the risk, you do need to understand the actual risk. And that is one thing that I think that Acorns did a bad job in. Like, if there's one thing that I want to criticize Acorns for, it's the fact that, I think they should have done more to educate people on what Bitcoin futures actually is. Like, because, there are people that invest into Acorns just for a passive way to invest, like I do. Like, Acorns is not the primary way that I invest, but I have it just as like a passive way to make money. But, the people out there, the other side that own Acorns because, they don't really know how, like, they don't, want to invest on their own. They don't want, like, they don't know what actually, like, individual stocks to buy. And the fact that Acorns is all investing for them, is absolutely amazing. And that's how they do it. They don't necessarily, like, want or need to go out and, learn, like, about individual stocks, learn what they should put their money in, like, learn how to evaluate a stock. But what they do is they just, put into Acorns and have it passively invest. Those kinds of people that aren't researching all the time, they might see that Acorns is, working with Bitcoin and be like, oh, I can get, Bitcoin into Acorns now. And then as Bitcoin goes up, so will, 5% of my portfolio. But what they don't realize is that, these are Bitcoin futures and Bitcoin futures work a lot differently than just like, Bitcoin itself. And, they think they're getting something that they're not. And I think that, Acorns probably should have done a better job of, when they launched, the fact that like, people on aggressive portfolios can get 5% of their allocation into Bitcoin futures. Should have done more like educate people on the difference between like Bitcoin futures and Bitcoin itself and, what that means for them so they actually know what they're putting their money into. Because my guess would be a lot of people that, change to 5% into Bitcoin futures actually have no idea what they actually did and the actual differences between Bitcoin spot and Bitcoin futures. And that's kind of my opinion on that. I do think it's amazing that Acorns did this, and I think it's very good for Bitcoin itself. And, I can't wait for Bitcoin spot ETF to come out and be able to put 5% of that, or like put 5% of my, Acorns portfolio into Bitcoin spot ETF. But with Bitcoin futures, like with being so risky, I'm not sure if I want to put 5% into Bitcoin futures. I've got to do a lot more research before I decide that, but that's kind of where I'm at there. I do think this is very good news, but it's kind of, I think Acorns should have done more to like educate people. Like I think as a whole this is good, but I think they should have done more to actually show the people that use Acorns what they're getting. Thank you for listening to this podcast episode. Make sure you either subscribe to the YouTube channel or subscribe on whatever podcast platform you're currently listening on. And thank you for listening.